I'm Allison, 28 years old, and I've always been the invisible second daughter. Growing up, my parents only had eyes for my sister Megan, who became the doctor they always wanted. 6 months ago, I stood at the altar without my parents in attendance. They were too busy celebrating Megan's surprise engagement. But something miraculous happened last weekend when I pulled up to our family gathering in my new Porsche. Suddenly, after years of indifference, my parents couldn't stop talking to me. Funny how a $135,000 car made them finally remember I existed. Before I dive into my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most. My earliest memory is my 4th birthday party. While most kids would remember cake and presents, what I remember most vividly is my mother Diana rushing around, phone pressed between ear and shoulder, frantically coordinating 7-year-old Megan's dance recital scheduled for the same day. My party consisted of a hastily purchased grocery store cake and a single present, a coloring book my grandmother Eleanor had brought. My parents arrived home just as the small gathering ended, full of stories about how Megan had stolen the show. This became the pattern that defined my childhood. Megan received private tutors when she struggled with math, while I taught myself advanced concepts using borrowed library books. She attended expensive science and leadership camps every summer, while I stayed home or went to the public recreation center programs. When Megan brought home a B+ on a test, celebrations ensued with her favorite dinner and excessive praise. When I earned straight A's, I received distracted nods and mumbled, "That's nice, honey." The contrast was never clearer than during my 8th grade science fair. After months of work, my project on primitive computer programming won first place. The science teacher called my parents personally to tell them how impressed the judges were with my innovation. That evening, I waited by the gymnasium doors, trophy in hand, watching as other kids' parents arrived with flowers and cameras. Mine never showed. Later, I discovered they had attended Megan's soccer game instead, despite her team playing every weekend, and this being my only science fair that year. My grandmother Eleanor was the only one who truly encouraged my interest in technology. On quiet weekends when I visited her apartment, she would listen attentively as I explained whatever new computer concept I was learning. Though she didn't understand the technical details, she recognized my passion and constantly told me, "Your mind works in special ways, Allison. Don't let anyone dim that light." When I turned 12, my Uncle Robert, seeing my growing interest in computers, gave me my first desktop, nothing fancy, but it was mine to take apart, rebuild, and program. While my parents questioned the waste of money behind my back, Uncle Robert winked and told me, "The future belongs to people who understand these machines." Family dinners were exercises in invisibility. I would begin sharing something about school only to be interrupted by my mother asking Megan about her day, or my father Harold would check his phone mid-sentence as I spoke. They were physically present but emotionally unreachable, especially my father. His corporate executive position meant he worked long hours, but he always made time for Megan's events. Mine somehow never made it onto his calendar. My mother Diana, a successful real estate agent, was physically present more often, but emotionally just as distant. Her commentary focused primarily on my appearance. "Allison, you'd be so pretty if you lost 15 pounds, or have you considered doing something different with your hair? No boys will notice you looking like that." Meanwhile, Megan received compliments on her natural beauty and athletic build. High school graduation marked another painful milestone in the pattern. Megan had graduated 3 years earlier and received a brand new car to help her get around campus, my parents explained. When my graduation came, I received a card containing $100 and a generic "Congratulations, graduate" message. That night, I overheard my mother telling a relative on the phone, "Of course we're proud, but it's just high school. It's not like she got into medical school like Megan." College presented new challenges. While my parents covered every expense for Megan's medical school, tuition, apartment, even spending money, they informed me they had already spent their education budget on my sister. I worked 3 part-time jobs, mornings at a coffee shop, evenings at the campus computer lab, and weekends waiting tables. Between shifts, I maintained a 3.9 GPA in computer science. My Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister who had always seen through the favoritism, secretly slipped me money occasionally. "Don't tell your mother," she'd say. She'd accuse me of overstepping. Those small acts of kindness meant everything during those struggling years. The summer before my final year of college, during a rare visit home, I overheard my mother on the phone with a friend. "Of course we have 2 daughters," she said with a laugh, "but only one is going to be a doctor." That night, I made a promise to myself as I packed to return to my apartment near campus. I would build my own success story, one so impressive that even they couldn't ignore it. I wouldn't do it for their approval anymore, but to prove to myself that I was worthy of recognition, regardless of whether they ever gave it. As I pulled away from the house that had never really felt like home, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. The family I was born into might never truly see me, but perhaps the person I was becoming wouldn't need them to. College life consisted of constant motion. My alarm blared at 4:30 a.m. for coffee shop shifts that started at 5:30. Between classes, I would squeeze in study sessions at the library, grab lunch while reviewing notes, then head to the computer lab for my evening shift. Weekends meant double shifts at Antonio's Italian restaurant, where I mastered the art of carrying 5 plates on one arm while maintaining a pleasant smile despite exhaustion. The grueling schedule left little time for a social life, which made meeting Rachel during a required communications class all the more meaningful. Unlike the conditional acceptance I grew up with, Rachel's friendship came without stipulations. When I had to cancel plans to pick up extra shifts, she brought takeout to the computer lab. When I fell asleep during study sessions, she quietly took notes for both of us. "You work twice as hard as anyone I know," Rachel observed one night as we walked back to our respective dorms. "Your parents have no idea what they're missing in not supporting you." Despite my packed schedule, I excelled academically. Dr. Vivian Chin, my advanced algorithms professor, became the mentor I'd always craved. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. "Your solution to the database efficiency problem was innovative," she said. "Have you considered applying for the summer internship at TechSphere?" With Dr. Chen's recommendation, I secured the internship, which paid enough that I could reduce my other jobs to just weekend restaurant shifts. At TechSphere, I discovered I had a particular talent for identifying inefficiencies in code and creating elegant solutions. By summer's end, my supervisor offered to extend my position part-time through the school year. When graduation approached, my parents confirmed they would attend. They arrived 30 minutes late to the ceremony, missing my walk across the stage. During the celebratory dinner afterward, which I paid for with my internship savings, they spent most of the time discussing Megan's acceptance to a prestigious medical residency program. Before dessert was served, they excused themselves to drive to Megan's city 3 hours away, explaining they had promised to help her shop for professional attire the next morning. With my computer science degree in hand, I accepted an entry-level position at a promising startup. The salary was modest, but the potential for growth seemed unlimited. I shared a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other recent graduates, sleeping on a futon in what was technically the living room to save money. At the startup, I quickly earned a reputation for solving problems others had given up on. 6 months in, I developed a unique approach to a user interface issue that caught the attention of senior management. By my 1-year work anniversary, I had been promoted to mid-level developer with a small salary increase. It was during a tech conference in San Francisco that I met James. He was presenting on financial technology innovations, and I asked a question that challenged one of his points. Rather than becoming defensive, he invited me for coffee afterward to continue the discussion. That coffee turned into dinner, which evolved into regular video calls after we returned to our respective cities. 3 months later, James took a position at a company in my city. Our relationship deepened as we discovered a shared experience of family pressure, though in his case, it came from expectations to follow his father's career path rather than outright neglect. The first time I brought James to meet my family was at Thanksgiving dinner. My mother spent the evening questioning him about his job and salary while barely acknowledging my recent promotion. My father engaged him in conversation about investment strategies, but changed the subject when I tried to share news about a project I was leading. The evening reached peak awkwardness when my parents fawned over Megan's new boyfriend Brian, a corporate lawyer, while treating James as an afterthought. In the car ride home, James was uncharacteristically quiet. "I'm sorry about my family," I said, breaking the silence. "Don't apologize for them," he replied, reaching for my hand. "But Allison, I need to ask, do you see how abnormal their behavior is? The way they treat you isn't okay." Until that moment, I hadn't realized how I'd normalized their indifference. Seeing it through James's eyes made the pattern impossible to ignore. As my second year at the startup drew to a close, I received an unexpected job offer from Tech, one of the largest technology companies in the country. The position came with a significant salary increase, comprehensive benefits, and stock options. When I called my parents to share the news, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Megan might be published in a medical journal?" At Tech, I thrived under the mentorship of experienced developers. I lived simply despite my improved financial situation, maximizing my retirement contributions and building substantial savings. James and I moved in together, sharing a modest one-bedroom apartment despite both earning comfortable salaries. We were saving for something bigger, though at the time, we hadn't defined what that might be. 18 months into my tenure at Tech, I presented a machine learning solution that dramatically improved the company's main product. The implementation resulted in a 15% performance increase and garnered attention throughout the company. The following week, I was promoted to lead developer with a salary that finally reflected my true value, plus stock options that would vest over the next 3 years. For the first time in my life, I felt like my efforts were being recognized and rewarded. The validation I'd been seeking from my family had come instead from my career, and somehow, that felt even more meaningful. James proposed on a crisp autumn morning during a hike to Angel Falls. We had just reached the summit overlooking the cascading water when he took my hand and dropped to one knee. The ring was simple but elegant, a solitaire diamond on a platinum band that caught the early morning sunlight. "Allison, you're the strongest person I've ever known," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I want to spend my life supporting your dreams the way you support mine. Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, I said yes. Later that evening, after sharing the news with James's enthusiastically supportive family, I called my parents. The phone rang 6 times before my mother answered, sounding distracted. "Hi, Mom. I have some exciting news," I began, unable to contain my happiness. "James proposed today and we're engaged." "Oh, that's nice," she replied, her tone flat. "Hold on. Your father wants to know if we need to pick up something for Megan while we're out. We're heading to her place to help decorate her new home office." The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes and ended with no congratulations from my father, who apparently couldn't be bothered to come to the phone. James found me sitting on our balcony afterward, staring at my ring with conflicted emotions. "They didn't care, did they?" he asked softly, sitting beside me. I shook my head. "They're busy helping Megan with her home office." James took my hand. "Then we'll plan a wedding that's perfectly us, with people who truly care." We decided on a spring ceremony in a botanical garden, followed by a reception at a nearby historic inn. Our vision was simple but elegant, nothing extravagant, but beautiful in its authenticity. When my mother finally called back 3 days later, she suggested we meet to discuss wedding plans. I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps they would show interest in this significant life event. That hope was extinguished during our meeting at a local restaurant. My father checked his phone constantly while my mother flipped through my carefully prepared planning folder with obvious disinterest. "Have you considered postponing?" she asked abruptly. "Your sister mentioned that Brian might propose soon, and you wouldn't want your weddings to be too close together." I felt my cheeks burn. "We've already set the date, Mom. The deposits are paid." "Well," she sighed, "I just think a fall wedding would be nicer. Spring is so unpredictable. And this venue seems rather modest. Wouldn't you prefer something more impressive?" "We love the botanical garden," I replied firmly. "It's exactly what we want." "I suppose if you're paying for it yourself, You can do whatever you like, she said with a dismissive wave. That comment sparked the question I'd been avoiding. Actually, I wanted to ask if you and Dad would be contributing to the wedding costs. It was traditional, after all, for the bride's parents to help. My father finally looked up from his phone. Allison, we've already committed to helping Megan with her student loans this year. I'm not sure we can manage both. I see, I replied, swallowing the hurt. That's fine. James and I can cover everything. And we did. Every deposit, every vendor payment came from our savings. Rachel stepped in as my maid of honor and unofficial wedding planner, helping me research options that would maximize our budget without sacrificing quality. Your parents are contributing nothing, she asked incredulously during a cake tasting. After paying for Megan's entire education. I shrugged, pretending their refusal didn't cut deep. At least this way we get exactly what we want. My Aunt Catherine called after receiving her invitation. Your mother mentioned you're planning your own wedding, she said. Robert and I would like to help. Would you let us pay for the flowers and photography as our gift to you? Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. That would be amazing, Aunt Catherine. Thank you. Rachel organized a beautiful bridal shower with my closest friends. My mother and Megan both declined to attend, citing a spa day they had planned months in advance. The absence of female family members was conspicuous, but my friends filled the space with genuine joy and celebration. A week before the wedding, my mother canceled our appointment to shop for her outfit, explaining that Megan had an emergency involving a plumbing issue in her new house. Family has to come first, she said, apparently missing the irony that I too was family. The wedding rehearsal dinner, a small gathering at our favorite restaurant, began 30 minutes late because we were waiting for my parents. They stayed for the minimum polite amount of time, my father taking 2 business calls during dinner while my mother complained about the limited wine selection. The final blow came the night before the wedding. I was in the hotel room I'd booked near the venue, trying to calm my nerves, when my phone chimed with a text message from my mother. Something's come up. Brian proposed to Megan tonight. We're hosting an impromptu engagement celebration tomorrow. Unfortunately, we won't be able to make it to your ceremony. I'm sure you understand that we can't miss this important moment for your sister. Best wishes for your special day. I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times before the reality sank in. My parents were skipping my wedding for Megan's engagement party, an event they had apparently arranged themselves, on my wedding day. The tears came without warning, and once they started, I couldn't stop them. Years of disappointment and rejection culminated in this moment of ultimate betrayal. Rachel found me curled on the bed, still clutching my phone. They're not coming, I managed between sobs. They scheduled Megan's engagement party for tomorrow. Rachel sat beside me, her own eyes filling with tears of anger on my behalf. Then they don't deserve to see you become a bride, she said fiercely. Tomorrow you'll marry a man who adores you, surrounded by people who truly care. And someday, your parents will realize what they missed. I fell asleep that night with puffy eyes and a broken heart, but also with a strange sense of clarity. Their absence tomorrow would be their final statement on where I stood in their lives. And perhaps, finally, I could stop hoping for a relationship that had never truly existed. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains as I opened my eyes, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling. Then reality rushed back, both the joy of my wedding day and the pain of my parents' final betrayal. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to acknowledge the hurt before pushing it aside. Today would be beautiful, with or without them. Rachel arrived with coffee and breakfast, followed by my bridesmaids bearing champagne and supportive smiles. My grandmother Eleanor came early, her arthritis not preventing her from helping me with my jewelry. Your grandfather would have been so proud, she said, her voice wavering slightly. He always said you had a spirit that couldn't be broken. Uncle Robert knocked on the door as I was finishing my makeup. When I opened it, I saw him standing there in a handsome suit, his expression a mixture of sadness and determination. I know I'm not your father, he said gently, but I would be honored to walk you down the aisle, if you'll have me. Fresh tears threatened to ruin my carefully applied mascara. I would love that, Uncle Robert. The ceremony was intimate and perfect. 75 guests filled the garden chairs, the notable absence of my immediate family overshadowed by the genuine love that surrounded us. When Uncle Robert placed my hand in James's, the look of complete adoration in my soon-to-be husband's eyes healed something broken inside me. Our vows were personal and heartfelt. James promised to be the family I deserved, to celebrate every achievement and support me through every challenge. I promised to build our life on trust and appreciation, never taking his love for granted. At the reception, the table reserved for my parents and sister remained empty, a visual reminder of their choice. But the surrounding tables overflowed with colleagues who had become friends, college roommates who had supported me through difficult times, and extended family who had made the effort to attend. Uncle Robert's toast brought both laughter and tears. I've watched Allison grow from a determined little girl who built her first computer at 12 to an extraordinary woman who builds not just technology, but meaningful relationships. James, you're gaining not just a wife, but a remarkable partner who will never stop surprising you with her strength and brilliance. Grandmother Eleanor approached me during the dancing, pressing a velvet box into my hands. Inside lay a strand of pearls I had always admired in her jewelry box. I was saving these for your 30th birthday, she explained, but I want you to have them now. They've witnessed over 60 years of joy and hardship in my life. Now they'll witness the beautiful future you're creating. As James and I swirled across the dance floor for our first dance, I realized I felt surprisingly complete. The people who had chosen to be present were exactly the ones who deserved to share in our happiness. The following week, we flew to Bali for our honeymoon, 10 days of beaches, cultural experiences, and reconnection away from the emotional turbulence of the wedding. In our private villa overlooking the Indian Ocean, I finally felt the tension leave my body. No phone calls, no emails, James decreed, taking my devices and storing them in the room safe. Just us in paradise for the next 10 days. Those days were healing. We explored ancient temples, swam with manta rays, and enjoyed romantic dinners on the beach. Without the constant pressure to prove my worth, I remembered who I was beyond my family's perception. Reality crashed back upon our return. No congratulatory messages from my parents or sister awaited us. My mother hadn't even sent a perfunctory gift or card. The complete radio silence spoke volumes about where I ranked in their priorities. Despite James's unwavering support and our beautiful start as newlyweds, I fell into a depression that I couldn't shake. I would find myself crying while preparing dinner or staring blankly at the television, not really watching the program playing. I don't understand why it still hurts so much, I confessed to James one evening. I should be used to their indifference by now. Because you deserved better, he said simply. And part of you still hopes they'll realize that. After a particularly difficult week where I could barely concentrate at work, James gently suggested therapy. You wouldn't ignore a broken arm, he reasoned. Why ignore a broken heart? Dr. Patricia Winters, a family therapist specializing in parental estrangement, helped me navigate the complex emotions I'd suppressed for years. In our first session, she asked me to describe my family dynamics without judgment or explanation. Just the facts, she instructed. What happened, not why you think it happened. Listing the incidents out loud, from missed birthdays to the empty wedding seats, made the pattern undeniable. What you're describing, Dr. Winters explained in our third session, is conditional love. Your parents valued your sister's achievements because they aligned with their vision. Your path didn't fit their narrative, so they withdrew their support. But why couldn't they be proud of me too? I asked, the question that had haunted me since childhood finally spoken aloud. I'm successful. I'm happy. Why wasn't that enough? Some parents view their children as extensions of themselves rather than individuals, she explained. Their love depends on you fulfilling their expectations, not on who you actually are. That's their limitation, Allison, not yours. That realization was both devastating and liberating. I couldn't change them, but I could change how their behavior affected me. I returned to work with renewed focus, channeling my emotional energy into professional growth. My team had been assigned a major new product development, and I threw myself into the challenge, working late hours and weekends. "You're our star developer," my boss commented during my quarterly review, but remember that work-life balance matters too. I nodded and promised to be more mindful, but privately, I welcomed the distraction. Every solved coding problem, every successful implementation felt like concrete proof of my value, something my parents had never acknowledged. As the months passed, the acute pain of my parents' wedding absence gradually dulled to a background ache. James and I established holiday traditions of our own, declining the half-hearted Thanksgiving invitation from my mother with the explanation that we had already made other plans. Life settled into a new normal, one centered around my marriage, career, and chosen family rather than the biological one that had consistently let me down. And surprisingly, most days, that felt like enough. 9 months after our wedding, my boss Kyle called me into his office. A tall, straightforward man in his late 50s, Kyle had always valued results over politics, one of the reasons I respected him greatly. "Allison, I'm assigning you to lead the Phoenix project," he announced without preamble. "It's a complete overhaul of our core platform, high visibility, high pressure, and high reward if you pull it off." The Phoenix project was Maventeca's most ambitious initiative in years, an attempt to modernize their flagship product while maintaining compatibility with existing systems. It was the kind of career-defining opportunity that rarely came to someone my age. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because you solve problems everyone else avoids," Kyle replied. "And because you never quit, even when you should." My new team consisted of 12 developers, including Mark Chin, a brilliant database architect with a dry sense of humor, and Lisa Patel, a front-end specialist whose attention to detail was unmatched. Both quickly became not just colleagues, but friends who understood the pressure I was under. The project timeline was aggressive, 12 months to completely rebuild a system that had evolved over a decade. Most nights, I left the office well after 8, sometimes catching dinner with Mark or Lisa before returning to my desk. James supported me unfailingly, bringing meals to the office on weekend crunch sessions and listening patiently to technical challenges he didn't fully understand. "I'm sorry I've been so absent," I told him one Sunday evening as we ate takeout at my desk. "You haven't been absent," he corrected. "You've been present in a different way. This matters to you, so it matters to me." For months into the project, we hit a critical obstacle. Our approach to data migration was failing under load testing, threatening to derail the entire timeline. The team worked for 72 hours straight trying different solutions, but nothing provided the performance we needed. On the third night, after most of the team had gone home to get much-needed rest, I remained staring at monitors of failed tests. The solution came to me at 3:17 a.m., not an improvement to our current approach, but a completely different paradigm. Instead of migrating data in the traditional sense, we could create an adaptive layer that would translate between old and new systems on demand. I coded frantically until morning, building a prototype that I demonstrated to the bleary-eyed team when they returned. The results were undeniable, a 90% reduction in migration time with minimal data overhead. "This is why you're leading this project," Mark said, examining the elegant solution with obvious admiration. "I wouldn't have thought outside the box like this." 3 weeks later, I presented the innovative approach to the company's executive team. The room fell silent when I finished my demonstration, then erupted in applause. The CTO, a notoriously difficult man to impress, asked several pointed questions before nodding with satisfaction. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we need," he concluded. "Excellent work, Allison." The Phoenix project launched 2 months ahead of schedule with performance metrics that exceeded all projections. User adoption rates soared, and industry publications featured our innovative approach as a case study in successful legacy system modernization. The company's stock jumped 12% following the successful launch, and I received a substantial bonus along with additional stock options as recognition for my leadership. Kyle called me into his office again, this time with the company's CEO present. "We're creating a new position," the CEO explained. "Director of Innovation, reporting directly to the CTO. We'd like you to be the first to fill it." The promotion came with a corner office, a team of 30 developers, and a salary that made me momentarily dizzy when I saw the offer letter. My compensation had now crossed well into six figures, with stock options that could be worth significantly more if the company continued its growth trajectory. That evening, James and I celebrated at the city's finest restaurant, a place we normally considered too extravagant for our careful spending habits. To my brilliant wife, James toasted, raising his champagne glass, whose talent is finally being recognized as it deserves. Over dessert, we had an honest conversation about our financial future. We've been saving aggressively for 3 years, James pointed out. We have enough for a down payment on a house with plenty left in emergency funds. I know, I agreed. But part of me is still afraid to spend money. Like, somehow it might all disappear. That's understandable, given how you grew up, he acknowledged. But at some point, we should enjoy the success we've earned. The conversation shifted to what indulgence might actually mean to us. A house was practical, but we both agreed we wanted something that symbolized our journey, something purely for joy rather than necessity. When I was 16, I confessed, I used to drive past the luxury car dealership on my way to my weekend job. I'd look at the Porsches and think about how someday, I'd walk in there and buy one without asking the price. James grinned. I never knew you were a car enthusiast. Not cars generally, just Porsches. They represent precision engineering and attention to detail. Excellence without compromise. The next day, a stack of Porsche brochures mysteriously appeared on our coffee table. James feigned innocence, but the twinkle in his eye gave him away. I spent weeks researching models, configurations, and options. The 911 Carrera S in midnight blue metallic called to me, elegant yet powerful. The price tag of $135,000 made me hesitate repeatedly, but James kept reminding me that our careful financial management over the years had created the freedom to make this choice. We're still maxing out retirement contributions, we have no debt, and our emergency fund would cover a year of expenses, he reasoned. If not now, when? Finally, on a crisp fall morning, we walked into the Porsche dealership together. The salesperson recognized a serious buyer immediately, skipping the usual sales tactics and focusing on the details that mattered to me. 3 hours later, I signed the papers for my dream car, a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. As I sat in the driver's seat, inhaling the scent of fine leather and running my fingers over the precise stitching of the steering wheel, I felt a complex emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Later, I realized what it was: pride. Not pride in the car itself, but in the journey that had brought me to this moment, the countless hours of hard work, the resilience in the face of rejection, and the courage to finally believe I deserved something beautiful simply because I wanted it. 2 weeks after purchasing the Porsche, my phone rang with a number I rarely saw anymore, my mother's. I stared at the screen for several rings before answering cautiously. Hello. Allison. It's your mother, she said, as if I wouldn't recognize her voice. We're planning a family gathering next weekend for your grandmother Eleanor's birthday. Saturday at 2. Your father and I expect you to be there. No pleasantries, no questions about my life or acknowledgement of the months of silence since my wedding. Just an expectation of compliance. I haven't heard from you since before my wedding, I replied evenly. The wedding you missed for Megan's engagement party. A brief pause. Well, that's all water under the bridge now, isn't it? Your grandmother would be disappointed if you didn't come. No apology, not even recognition of the hurt they had caused. Yet the mention of my grandmother gave me pause. Eleanor had always been my champion, and I wouldn't punish her for my parents' behavior. I'll check my calendar and let you know, I said finally, unwilling to commit immediately. Fine, my mother replied briskly. Let me know by tomorrow. Your sister and Brian will be there to share their wedding plans. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, processing the conversation. James found me still staring at my phone when he returned from his run. Family, he guessed, noting my expression. I nodded. Grandma Eleanor's birthday gathering. They want me there. What do you want? He asked, the question that had guided many of our decisions together. I want to see my grandmother, I said slowly. But I'm dreading seeing my parents and Megan. The next day, I discussed the invitation with Dr. Winters during our therapy session. Family gatherings often trigger old patterns, she cautioned. Have you thought about what boundaries you want to maintain? We spent the session developing strategies for protecting my emotional well-being while still honoring my relationship with my grandmother. By the end, I felt prepared to attend without falling back into the role of the invisible, accommodating daughter. Remember, Dr. Winters said as our session concluded, you're not going as the child seeking approval. You're going as an adult making a choice to see people on your own terms. I called my mother and confirmed our attendance. James and I discussed how to approach the gathering during the week leading up to it. I think we should be completely authentic, James suggested. No downplaying your success, no hiding our happiness. Let them see exactly who you are now. Including taking the Porsche? I asked, thinking of the statement it would inevitably make. James smiled. Especially taking the Porsche. Not to show off, but because it's genuinely your car. Why would we take anything else? As the day approached, my anxiety manifested physically, insomnia, tension headaches, and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't dissolve. The morning of the gathering, I changed outfits 3 times, vacillating between wanting to look successful and not wanting to appear like I was trying too hard. You look beautiful, James assured me as I finally settled on a simple but elegant dress and the pearl necklace from my grandmother. Ready? The drive to my parents' suburban home took 45 minutes, time I spent alternating between nervous silence and reviewing the boundaries I'd established with Dr. Winters. As we turned onto their street, I felt my heart rate accelerate. Remember, James said, squeezing my hand, we can leave anytime you want. I nodded gratefully, then turned into the circular driveway, the Porsche's distinctive engine note announcing our arrival. Several relatives stood on the front lawn, their conversations pausing as we pulled up. Uncle Robert gave an appreciative whistle, while Aunt Catherine smiled knowingly. My mother emerged from the front door, her practiced real estate agent smile freezing momentarily as she registered the luxury vehicle. My father appeared behind her, his eyes widening in obvious surprise. That's quite an entrance, my mother remarked as I stepped out of the car. Her gaze traveled from the Porsche to my dress to my carefully styled hair, assessment evident in every glance. Nice car, my father said, approaching to examine it more closely. 911 Carrera S? What year is it? It's a 2023, I replied, noting the sudden interest from the man who had barely spoken 10 words to me at our last meeting. I just got it a few weeks ago. Must have set you back quite a bit, he commented, running his hand appreciatively over the hood. 135,000, I said matter-of-factly, watching my parents exchange glances. My company has been generous with bonuses after the success of my last project. My mother's demeanor shifted instantly, her smile warming as she linked her arm through mine. Allison, you look wonderful. You must tell us all about your work. I always knew you were destined for great things. The transformation was jarring from months of indifference to sudden, intense interest. As we entered the house, my mother steered me towards several relatives, her voice uncharacteristically loud as she announced, "Have you seen Allison? She's a director at Maven Tech now. Such a prestigious position." My sister Megan stood by the refreshment table with Brian, both watching my entrance with poorly disguised surprise. Megan's smile seemed strained as she offered a stiff hug. "Love the dress," she said, her eyes flicking to the car visible through the window. "Things must be going well." "They are," I confirmed, refusing to downplay my success. "How's the wedding planning going?" As Megan launched into details about venue options, I noticed my father had cornered James, asking pointed questions about investment strategies and retirement planning. The sudden interest in our financial situation was transparent and uncomfortable. When we sat for dinner, my parents insisted James and I take seats at the main table, positions that would normally have been reserved for Megan and Brian as the engaged couple. My mother hovered attentively, refilling my water glass and interrupting conversations to highlight my recent promotion. "Allison has a team of 30 people reporting to her now," she informed my father's business associate, despite never having asked me about my job responsibilities. "She's always been so ambitious." As dessert was served, my mother leaned close, her voice lowered conspiratorially. "Your sister's been struggling a bit with their down payment savings. The housing market is so competitive right now. I was thinking, since you're doing so well financially, perhaps you might consider loaning them a bit to help with their renovation plans. And there it was, the real reason for the sudden interest in my life. Not genuine care about my well-being or regret for missing my wedding, but the realization that I might be useful to their golden child. I felt James tense beside me, but I placed a calming hand on his knee under the table. This moment required neither anger nor defensiveness, just clarity. I'll have to think about that, Mom, I replied evenly. James and I are quite careful with our financial planning. My mother nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable response, but the calculating look in her eyes told me this conversation was far from over. As my grandmother's birthday cake was presented, I exchanged glances with James, both of us recognizing that we had entered a new phase in my family dynamics, one where I was suddenly visible, but only for what I could provide. The evening progressed with increasing discomfort as my parents continued their performance of proud, supportive parents. My father, who had barely acknowledged my career choices previously, now introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter, the tech executive, as if he'd been my biggest champion all along. Allison has always had a brilliant mind for technology, he told his golf buddy, clapping me on the shoulder. Takes after me with that analytical thinking. I nearly choked on my drink at this rewriting of history, remembering the many times he dismissed my computer interests as playing around on those machines. James squeezed my hand under the table, his touch grounding me as the revisionist narratives continued. My mother was equally performative, suddenly producing photos of me as a child that I hadn't realized she kept. Look at my Allison in her science camp t-shirt, she cooed to relatives, conveniently omitting that she had refused to pay for that camp, forcing me to earn the money myself by mowing lawns. You've always been so industrious, she added, as if this had been a quality she admired rather than a necessity she had created. The surreal experience peaked during dinner when my mother clinked her glass for attention. We have 2 celebrations today, she announced. Grandma Eleanor's birthday, of course, but also a chance to recognize Allison's tremendous success. We always knew she would make something of herself. James's eyebrows shot up at this blatant fabrication, but I kept my expression neutral as relatives applauded. My sister Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat and used to sharing the spotlight at family gatherings. And of course, my mother continued, we're so excited about Megan and Brian's upcoming wedding. Which reminds me, now that we've gotten to know James better, perhaps we should plan a proper reception for Allison and James too. Something more substantial than what they initially had. The implication that our carefully planned, meaningful wedding had been somehow inadequate hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Several relatives glanced away awkwardly, aware of my parents' absence from that wedding. I felt something shift inside me, a final thread of hope that they might someday acknowledge their hurtful behavior snapped cleanly. The persistent ache of wanting their approval suddenly vanished, replaced by a clarifying anger that felt almost like relief. A proper reception, I repeated, my voice quiet but steady. Like the one you missed because you were throwing an engagement party for Megan? That proper reception. The room fell silent. My mother's smile froze on her face. Now, Allison, she began, her tone patronizing, there's no need to bring up ancient history. We're trying to make things right. Ancient history? I echoed, setting down my fork carefully. My wedding was 9 months ago. You didn't even send a card. Well, these things happen, my father interjected dismissively. Scheduling conflicts arise. The important thing is that we're family, and family supports each other. He glanced meaningfully at my sister. Speaking of which, Megan mentioned you might be able to help with her medical school loans. With your new position, I imagine that wouldn't be a hardship. 20 years of suppressed emotions coalesced into a moment of perfect clarity. I looked around the table at my sister's entitled expression, my father's calculating gaze, and my mother's artificial smile. Then I glanced at James, whose eyes reflected both concern and unwavering support. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your attention, I said, my voice remarkably calm given the storm inside me. My achievements were ignored while Megan's were celebrated. My wedding day, the most important day of my life, wasn't worth your time. But now that I have financial success, suddenly I matter. You're exaggerating, my mother scoffed, though her voice wavered slightly. We've always supported you. When? I challenged. When I won the state science fair and you skipped it for Megan's soccer game. When I graduated college with honors and you left before the ceremony ended. When you refused to help with my tuition while paying every cent of Megan's medical school. We had limited resources, my father defended. We had to make choices. Yes, you did, I agreed. And every single choice made it clear where I stood in your priorities. My sister Megan intervened, her tone condescending. Allison, you've always had such a flair for drama. Not everything is about you. That's exactly right, I replied evenly. Nothing in this family has ever been about me. Until today, when you saw my car and calculated its value. A strangled sound from across the table drew my attention. Aunt Catherine was nodding slowly, tears in her eyes. She's right, Diana, my aunt said to my mother. I've watched for years as you favored Megan and ignored Allison. We all saw it, but no one said anything. I should have spoken up sooner. Uncle Robert added his support. Harold, the way you've treated Allison compared to Megan has been shameful. The girl paid her own way through college while working 3 jobs, and you couldn't even attend her wedding. My grandmother Eleanor, who had been silent throughout the exchange, reached for my hand across the table. I saw it too, dear one, she admitted, her voice quavering. I tried to compensate with extra love, but I should have challenged your parents directly. I failed you too. My mother's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. We're being attacked in our own home after trying to celebrate Eleanor's birthday. Allison, you've clearly been nursing these imagined grievances for years. Maybe if you hadn't been so withdrawn and difficult. Stop it, Diana, my grandmother interrupted sharply. Don't you dare blame the child for the parents' failures. My father stood abruptly. I will not be lectured about parenting in my own house. Allison, you've achieved success, great. But this display of ingratitude is beneath you. We expect more respect than this. Respect is earned, James said quietly, his first contribution to the confrontation. And it goes both ways. I looked at my father, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. You don't want my respect, I observed. You want access to my success. There's a difference. Rising from my chair, I continued, I didn't buy that Porsche to impress you or to flaunt my wealth. I bought it to remind myself that I succeeded despite your neglect, not because of your support. It's a symbol of what I built on my own, when you gave me nothing but doubt and indifference. My mother burst into tears, not quiet, dignified tears, but histrionic sobs that immediately drew Megan to her side, shooting me accusatory glares. How could you upset her like this? Megan demanded. After everything they've done for us. For us. I repeated incredulously. For you, Megan. Always for you. I turned to my grandmother, kissing her cheek gently. I'm sorry to disrupt your birthday, Grandma. I'll call you tomorrow. As James and I moved toward the door, relatives parted silently, the tension in the room palpable. My father called after me, his voice tight with anger and perhaps a hint of panic. Allison, don't walk out like this. We're family. I paused at the door, turning to face the gathering. Family supports each other through everything, not just when it's convenient or profitable. I've built a life with people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. When you're ready to be part of that life on those terms, let me know. As we stepped onto the porch, I heard footsteps behind us. Uncle Robert, Aunt Catherine, and my grandmother had followed us out. We're proud of you, Uncle Robert said simply, embracing me. Not because of the car or the job, but because of the person you've become despite everything. Aunt Catherine wiped away tears. Don't shut us all up because of them, please. Some of us have always seen your light. My grandmother hugged me last, her fragile arms surprisingly strong. I should have done more, she whispered. Forgive an old woman's cowardice. There's nothing to forgive, I assured her. You were my safe harbor in the storm. As James and I walked to the car, I felt simultaneously drained and liberated. The confrontation I had avoided for decades had finally happened, and though painful, it had been necessary, not to change my parents, but to free myself from hoping they would ever change. The drive home from my parents' house felt like crossing a boundary between 2 different lives. James remained quiet, occasionally glancing at me with concern as I stared out the window, processing the evening's events. "Are you okay?" he finally asked as we turned onto our street. I considered the question seriously before answering. "Yes," I realized with some surprise. "I actually am. It hurts, but it's a clean hurt, like removing a splinter that's been festering for years." That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, as if a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten its presence had finally been lifted. The following morning brought a flood of text messages from my parents, alternating between angry accusations and wounded victimhood. "I've raised an ungrateful daughter," my father wrote. "After everything we've done for you." My mother's messages were more manipulative. "You've broken my heart. I'm not sure I'll ever recover from this public humiliation." I showed the messages to James, who shook his head in disbelief. "Not a single acknowledgement of anything you said. Not one moment of self-reflection." I didn't really expect there would be, I admitted. They've had 28 years to reflect and never have. Why start now? During my next therapy session, Dr. Winters helped me develop a strategy for moving forward. "What kind of relationship, if any, do you want with your parents going forward?" she asked. After careful consideration, I decided on limited contact with clear boundaries rather than complete estrangement. "They're still my parents," I explained. "I'm not holding out hope they'll change dramatically, but I also don't want to cut them off entirely." "That's a mature decision," Dr. Winters affirmed. "Just remember that boundaries only work if you enforce them consistently." Over the next few weeks, I focused on strengthening my relationships with those who had consistently supported me. Rachel came over for our traditional Sunday brunch, where I recounted the confrontation. "It's about time," she declared, raising her mimosa in a toast. To finally saying the quiet part out loud. Mark and Lisa from work joined us for dinner the following weekend, expanding our circle of friends. As we shared stories and laughter around our dining table, I realized we were building a chosen family based on mutual respect and genuine care. "You know what's funny?" Mark observed as the evening wound down. "Most people buy expensive cars to impress others, but your Porsche ended up being a truth serum that exposed who really cares about you." His insight struck me profoundly. The car that I'd once seen as a symbol of personal achievement had revealed something far more valuable than financial success: clarity about my relationships. Aunt Catherine, Uncle Robert, and Grandmother Eleanor visited the following weekend, deliberately choosing to connect with me separately from my parents. Over lunch at our apartment, Eleanor asked to see photos from our wedding. "It was beautiful," she sighed, tracing a finger over the images. "I'm so sorry they missed it." "I'm sorry they chose to miss it," I corrected gently. "But the people who truly wanted to be there were present." Uncle Robert nodded appreciatively at this distinction. "You've gained wisdom most people take decades more to develop, Allison." That afternoon, we discussed starting a mentorship program for young women interested in technology careers. With my industry connections and Uncle Robert's community ties, we developed a framework for quarterly workshops hosted at local high schools. "This feels more meaningful than any luxury purchase," I confessed as we outlined the program. "Using my success to create opportunities for others who might be overlooked." James squeezed my hand supportively. "This is who you've always been, someone who turns adversity into advantage, not just for yourself, but for others." Over the following months, I maintained minimal contact with my parents, responding to messages with brief, neutral replies and declining invitations that seemed designed to pull me back into old patterns. My sister Megan remained distant, clearly aligning herself with our parents' narrative of my betrayal. The mentorship program launched successfully, with 15 girls from underserved communities participating in our first workshop. Seeing their enthusiasm as they created their first programs reminded me of my own early excitement about technology. "You've found your purpose beyond career success," James observed one evening as I shared stories about a particularly promising student. "It's beautiful to witness." Our discussions about starting our own family took on new urgency and depth. "I want to create a home where every child feels equally valued," I said. "Where achievement is celebrated, but never becomes a condition for love." "That's exactly the kind of parent you'll be," James assured me. "Because you know firsthand how damaging the alternative is." One crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after buying the Porsche, I made an unexpected decision. After dropping James at the airport for a business trip, I drove to the girls' coding workshop I now taught monthly. Parking the luxury car in the modest high school lot, I realized how my relationship with it had evolved. Initially a symbol of personal achievement, then inadvertently a catalyst for family confrontation, the car now represented something different. A vehicle that quite literally transported opportunities to young women who might otherwise never encounter them. As I gathered my teaching materials from the trunk, a student approached shyly. "Ms. Allison, is that your car?" "It's amazing." I smiled, remembering my 16-year-old self staring longingly at similar vehicles through dealership windows. "It is. Would you like to see inside before we start class?" Her eyes widened with excitement, and as I showed her the features and explained the engineering principles behind the performance, I recognized something of myself in her enthusiasm. Not materialism, but appreciation for excellence and possibilities. "Do you think I could have something like this someday?" she asked hesitantly. Without question, I assured her. But remember, the car isn't the achievement. It's just a symbol of the journey. The real achievement is becoming someone who defines success on your own terms, not anyone else's. As we walked together toward the classroom, I reflected on how far I had come from the invisible second daughter desperate for parental approval. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led to something authentic and meaningful, a life built on my own foundation rather than someone else's expectations. True validation, I had finally learned, never comes from external sources, not from parents who suddenly remember you exist when your bank account grows, nor from possessions that impress others. It comes from living in alignment with your own values and using whatever success you achieve to create ripples of opportunity that extend far beyond yourself. The journey from invisible child to visible, confident woman hadn't ended with confrontation or even resolution with my family. It had simply opened a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own story rather than a secondary character in someone else's. What kind of family conflict have you experienced in your own life? Have you ever stood up to toxic patterns, or are you still finding your voice? Drop a comment below to share your story. Our community is here to support you. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by family approval. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into.